Hello again, everyone, and welcome to the Front Line with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo, as always, joined by Joe Resinello. And once more, dear brothers and sisters, let us go in to the breach. And we are very honored to be joined today by Rabbi Yehuda Levin. And for those of you not familiar with Rabbi Levin, he is the rabbi and founder of the congregation of Mevakshi. Am I pronouncing that correctly, Rabbi? Mevakshi Hashem?
Hashem, seekers of God.
I was going to say those who seek the Lord in Flatbush. At age 24, Rabbi delivered his first talk at the March for Life. That's where we come in. We met Rabbi Levin down in Wilmington, Delaware, which we'll get into in a minute. But he delivered his first talk at the March for Life in D.C. And for the next 32 years, he has spoken at least 29 times. He has run for both the mayor of New York in his life against Mayor Ed Koch a long time ago. And also he ran for Congress. He has a fraternal relationship with Cardinal Raymond Burke, who is a cardinal of the Roman Catholic Church in the United States. He has written op-ed pieces in the New York Times. The USA Today has appeared several times on CNN. God help you, Rabbi, that you survived your stay with CNN. And has been featured in many articles that have appeared in the New York Times. Recently, Rabbi Levin has embarked on a new chapter in his life to inform, educate, and activate millions of the faithful remnant. He plans to speak in a prophetic manner of Jewish scripture to challenge the failures of religio-conservative leadership in these important times. Rabbi Levin, welcome to the Front Line with Joe and Joe. My bio didn't do you justice. I just pulled it up. I wanted to hit a few main bullet points, but thank you again for joining us at the Front Line with Joe and Joe.
It's a privilege and a pleasure. Thank you.
Rabbi, it's an honor. I think a good place to start is this. Why does our society, as it currently stands, need to reinvite God into it? Because clearly we have kicked him out of Main Street USA. Why is it vital that we invite him back in?
Well, all we have to do is see what's going on around us. The breakdown of the family, the drug addiction, the narcissism, the over-the-top materialism, therefore, which diminishes our spiritual antenna, and the shrinking of this.
You're on mute.
All of these things are, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
All of these things are proof positive that as we lose our moorings and try to move away from a God-centric democracy to just a quote-unquote liberal, progressive democracy, as John Newhouse called it, the naked public square, all of us are suffering. It's very simple.
I would agree. Pope Benedict XVI, he calls what's going on right now in the world a dictatorship of relativism, whereby we've left the absolutes behind. Could you talk a little bit about that? Because both, Catholics as well as Jews, we believe in truth. Sadly, our society today embraces the whims of fads. Truth is something to change almost like socks. Your truth, my truth. This is something that's crazy. No society can sustain itself without absolutes. There are certain things like the 10 Commandments. God gave them to us to guide us, to lead us to freedom. What are your thoughts on this dictatorship of relativism?
Well, it's very interesting because even the most quote-unquote liberal, open-minded person, and there are unfortunately tens of millions of them who are so open-minded their brains have fallen out, even they will agree that we need to have regulations, traffic lights, speed limits, etc. So they darn well understand that in the physical world, if we just let it be a total wilding, that people are going to hurt each other, and they're going to have victims in their own families, and they understand that. So they support the concept of policemen to seeing that the traffic runs in the right way, and that everybody is not free to just drive without any concern for their fellow man. Why should it be any less important in all of the spiritual endeavors and all of the characteristics and attributes that are taught to us from the time of the Bible and until today, that we need to have this guidance, we need to have strictures and structures and basically, we have to open our minds to understand what's happening. The rabbis said 2,000 or more years ago, they taught that Jews should pray. Jews should pray. You know what Levin, you heard of Murphy's Law? Levin's law is as follows. My phone could not ring for hours a day, but if I'm doing a recording, my phone will ring. And if you want to say the devil is in the details, the devil doesn't like the recording that we're making now. So I apologize to people for the interruptions.
No problem.
The point is, the rabbi said thousands of years ago, 2,000 years ago, that we Jews have to pray for the survival and the benefit of kingdoms that classified us as third-class citizens and were really literally persecuting us thousands of years ago. And yet we should pray that they should be successful. Why? So the rabbis continue, because if there is no authority, ruling authority, if there's no structure of authority, men will become like cavemen and tear each other apart. Remember when Al Gore with the donations from abroad, from the Chinese, and the way he got away with that was he said there was no controlling authority.
Mm-hmm.
That was what the liberals said. So there has to be controlling authority. There has to be somebody who tells us adultery is wrong, stealing somebody else's wife. Joe Biden, when the husband of your wife, Dr. Jill, puts out a book and gives and explains that in Biden's biography, he conveniently says that he met Dr. Jill approximately 2 years after he actually met her, and the husband says that they were having an affair. That means, in addition to all the other wonderful things Biden has contributed to Americana and our culture, he also made wife stealing an art form. Okay, do we need a controlling authority to wag its finger and to say no, no, no? Adultery is bad. It hurts. It's not two adults doing what they want, but there are all kinds of tangential damage, as we see. As we see Hunter Biden as an example of collateral damage from a misbehaving father. Of course, we need standards, laws, regulations. We need these things.
Rabbi, when we met
in your mind, you remember that when it comes to, let's say, those who I think we would agree we're fighting against, it's not that they are for anarchy, and it's not that they are for no commandments. Remember, they want order. They just want a different order. So if we want to take it out of the context of, let's say, a Christian order and broaden it to a Judeo-Christian order where we have in common the moral law, the natural law, the Decalogue as given by God, okay? That's what, remember, they don't want to destroy rules. They just want to destroy the rules that you say are authentic and real, and as Joe pointed out, say, lead to true freedom, and they want to replace it with their humanist set of commandments. Thou shalt not be intolerant. Thou shalt not be, take your pick of all the different ways they try to tell us to live our lives. So I think it's an important distinction for the audience to know. We're not dealing with anarchists. They're not anarchists. They believe in order. It's just their order that they believe in, to the destruction of the historic the Judeo-Christian order. I think you would agree with that.
Joe, no, I actually would differ with you, and I want to explain why.
Okay.
They don't want absolute anarchy because only because they realize that the dog will eventually turn upon them and bite them. However, if they could have a partial anarchy, enough to destabilize the opinions, the bulwark, the foundations of the Judeo-Christian society that has existed for millennia, They're perfectly happy with this. And thus they play this cute little game of actually raising money for Black Lives Matter, which is not black. It's more of the people marching in Black Lives Matter are demented white people. And so the point is, but they are actively turning the other cheek to this, doing their best to encourage this, bailing out people. Why? Because in their potent witch's brew, they believe, say, that 35% anarchy, rioting after they don't like the results of an election, God willing. They believe this serves this purpose to cow the people. And they believe that this works hand in hand with the Governor Cuomo's and Newsom's that are draconian in their dictatorship and their autocratic ways of just picking out of the hat numbers and ideas about how many people can go to public school, how many people can be tested, who can walk on the street with a mask. So that is the milder form. What they're doing is a mild form of what they're doing is two things at the same time. They were allowing a certain amount of anarchy to set in, as we see in Philadelphia this past week. And the threats of anarchy are right out there. You better not vote the wrong way or we're going to come out there. And at the same time, they're ratcheting up the autocracy, the dictatorship, and they're taking away more and more of our rights. And when they achieve the right level that they want, then they will tone down the anarchy because the anarchy has served its purpose. But until such a time as we're totally cowed, as long as that couple, I forget in what state, came out, was it in St. Louis, and tried to defend themselves with guns, until those people can be punished for having the audacity, until they can take away the guns, until they can totally make the playing field totally uneven and lopsided, they will continue with the slice of salami anarchy techniques.
Do you feel that we're approaching a dangerous level? Both our peoples, Christians, have been persecuted under the Roman Empire for 300 years. Our Jewish brothers were persecuted during the Nazi regime. Do you feel that we're getting to a point where people of faith, people who believe in a fundamental truth, that faith is not something that's on the surface, something that we live day in, day out, inside the house, outside the house, do you feel that we're getting to a point where there is a dangerous place for, say, you or for me to basically exist in our society? What's your view? I think it would be very insightful.
I think you're being very genteel, and I think with apologies to Tiny Tim, you're tiptoeing through the tulips. I think it's a lot more. I remember defending in the United Nations. We had a press conference when Justice Bork. It was maybe a few months or a year after Justice Bork had been defeated in the quest to make him a Supreme Court justice. And I remember this because Mrs. Bork was, who I believe was a Catholic, was part of this group that we had, an interreligious group of primarily Catholic. And at the time, Catholics for Free Choice were making a push to delegitimize the Catholic NGO status, Vatican status in the United Nations. And we had a press conference in the United Nations at that time, in which I, as a Jew, was defending the Vatican and the Catholic Church. Now, our problems as second or third rate citizens did not start and end with the Nazi Holocaust. The Nazi Holocaust was a culmination of 2,000 years of us being second or third rate citizens and suffering tremendous pogroms, inquisitions, and persecutions in all kinds of lands. This was the role. We can't get into it now. It would take a lot of time to explain spiritually. This was the role of the Jew to suffer this, and it was also a way spiritually by integrating society at large. The Jew as we've seen now in the last 75 to 100 years. When the Jew integrates, Somerset Maugham, who was a writer in England, and he may have been anti-Semitic, I'm not sure, but Somerset Maugham said famously, I can't talk now until 6:45. Somerset Maugham said famously, the Jew sings either higher or lower than the rest of the choir. Meaning that when the Jew was in his ghetto, and when he was a third-class citizen, when he was kept out of academia, when he was kept out of many different areas of business by the Gentiles, or by the Gentile rulers or whatever, this was really a left-handed favor to the Jews. This doesn't excuse the perpetration of these things on the Jews, but it helped us to maintain our fervor and our religiosity, full octane, full throttle. When with the emancipation and the intellectual revolution, as it started with the Napoleonic times, and then it gathered steam in Europe in the 19th century, the Jews, where they were given the right, so they started to slip out of their ghettos and to try, and some of the more liberal ones, etc. Today, these Jews have no religious mooring. You find that they're ultra-liberals. And it's the Orthodox Jews, the ones that hewed to the faith, take my family. My parents had 5 children. But for my 5 siblings, one of my siblings had 14 children, the other 12, I 9, my sister 8, and so on. And we're replenishing, and gradually we are reconquering the title of religious Judaism. And within 3 or 4 decades, a significant amount of Jews who are not totally lost through assimilation are going to be religious Jews. We're coming back to what we believe is Messianic times. But the point is that there is a commonality. There's a commonality between the Jews and a commonality between the Christians, in that, as you absolutely are correct, in Roman and pagan times for hundreds of years, the Jews and the Romans were both thrown to the lions, etc. They were both viewed as threats, inasmuch as the Christians, who had formerly been whatever they were idolaters and pagans, until they picked up on major aspects of the Jewish religion of monotheism and that whole ethic. And because of that, the Romans and others were facing threats on 2 fronts now, the Jews and the new Jews, the Christians, so to speak. And now we see history repeating itself in certain parts of the world where there is a tremendous persecution of the Christians in an obvious physical way. We see it in many Muslim countries, and even including Egypt, they have problems. Now, in America, the persecution is another type. They're not yet. They're not beating up Christians in the street at this point. First of all, there were too many of them. The other side is not strong enough to get too physical. But occasionally they'll bomb churches and they'll burn things, and they will disparage Christianity in the colleges and in the streets and in so many areas. And this is the beginning. So this is a more genteel type of persecution and delegitimization. But it's a conscious effort. It's not coincidental. It's by design, and it's happening. And therefore, the same way that Jews and Christians will get together to fight for tuition tax credits, well, that's very, very nice. And it's important that we maintain our own school systems, because the public school are teaching our kids to become wild animals, lowering the standards of education, encouraging the sexualizing of our children, so that they won't be able to stay in stable marriage situations, because they'll have so many experiences before they get married. The marriage will just be another stop on the way to the next conquest, and the kids are going to suffer tremendously, and they are already. So if we can get together for tuition tax credits, it's far more important that we get together for moral standards and values. And as Benjamin Franklin said, we stand separate, we can either hang separately or hang together. And if we're not going to hang together, we are in the process of hanging separately. So it's vitally important that there be a strengthening of an alliance between religious Jews, religious Christians, and I, to maybe people's surprise, do not rule out religious Muslims. That means I tell my Muslim cousins, listen, we were sons, grandchildren, children of Abraham, Isaac, and Ishmael. And we have a lot of commonality. And if you want to be frank, just like Christianity was a branch that grew out of monotheism and Judaism and the Torah and Sinai, so too, anybody who knows the history knows that Muhammad worked as a butler in a Jewish household. He saw them pray 3 times a day. He said, that's good, I'm going to make it 5 times a day. He saw them eat kosher meat only, certain needs. I'll make halal meat. He saw them facing in their prayers to Jerusalem. I'll make it Mecca. I mean, it was a great job of lifting things, but what he did was he elevated, to a great extent, he brought the concept of disdain for immorality to the Muslim world. And they're being threatened, and their children are being steeped in the worst parts of Americana culture, whether they live in America or they live in anywhere in the world where everybody wants to ape the freedoms and the liberalism of America. So therefore, it behooves us to get together to the extent that it's possible with the more moderate but yet religious Muslims who don't want to kill us, etc. It behooves us to get in touch with, because there's strength in numbers, and to say and to stand up for moral and family values.
I would say, Rabbi, just to expand on that a little bit, the way I look at it is this. Obviously, Jews, Catholics, and Muslims have some very real differences. I would agree with you that because right now we have a common enemy. See, you're a Jew, we're Catholics. You're not our enemy, we're not your enemy, okay? And if people need to get it through their head that the common enemy is the enemy of everything we hold dear. Now, if we don't defeat this enemy, we'll never have an opportunity to dialogue amongst ourselves. Let's say frankly, about our differences, okay? How we all, even in, let's say, some of the more minor details, view how society should operate. I would encourage a lot of people. I mean, you must go through it with liberal Jews. We certainly have to go through it with very liberal, and let's call them what they are, secular Catholics. I think you would call them secular Jews, Jews in media and in Hollywood. They must not have too much love for you. If you got a Muslim that talks the way we do, he's not going to be very well liked amongst many in the Muslim community too. So I think it's very important, just to expand on what you said, is we'll never get to the point where we could even talk about our differences in a fraternal way, in an honest way, because the common enemy wants to destroy us all, because the one thing that we have in common is, like we said, our adherence, acceptance, and embracing of the moral and natural law, which is rejected by the secular culture. And when it's rejected by them, remember something. They're willing to take you right. And look, Rabbi, I don't need to tell you, one of the new symbols, and it's a very old symbol, but it's a new symbol being used now by a lot of these thug groups, are little guillotines that they're holding up. That means, Rabbi, you go and Joe and I go right into the middle of Times Square, and we get the chop in this culture war if we don't come together and defeat this enemy.
Well, let me actualize on this. In Jerusalem, for the last 15 or so years, they have a homosexual parade. Again, this is the aping of Americana. This is going on all over the world. They have a homosexual pride week and a parade in the holy city of Jerusalem, in the holiest place in the world, from my perspective. They march through the streets. And I traveled to Israel, and I spent a few months there, almost single-handedly fighting to try to stop the parade. And one year I was until they had to go to the Supreme Court in Israel to do this kind of thing. You know, it's an innate right to have the homosexual parades, et cetera, et cetera. You know, that was now. At that particular time, I went and I knocked on the door in the Knesset of Ahmed Tibi. Ahmed Tibi is a very brash, anti-Israel Muslim Knesset member. And the door opened and he is sitting there smoking a big cigar with his feet up on his desk. And he says to me in Hebrew, "What can I do for you?" I said, "Listen, your children are being corrupted by this pro-homosexual sodomy agenda, as well as ours. So why don't we put aside our differences right now and protest and fight against the homosexualization of our joint society here in Israel?" So he tells me, "You are at the wrong address. I'm a secularist." I said, "Well, who should I be speaking to in the Knesset?" He said, "There is a sheikh, I forget his name right now, it escapes me, and he is the equivalent, almost the equivalent of a Hamas type person in the democratic Israeli Knesset. The most extreme, vote for this guy. And you should go speak to him." So I tried to find him. He wasn't there. I spoke to one of the Jewish assistants to a Knesset member, and then I took a cab going back to where I was staying in Jerusalem. In the cab, I get a call, and he says, "I'm standing here with Sheikh Ibrahim Sarsour was his name. Sheikh Ibrahim Sarsour. He's no longer in the Knesset." And he says, "I'm putting him on the phone with you." So he tells me, "Honored Rabbi," you know how they speak in the Middle East, "Honored Rabbi, what can I do for you?" I said, "Listen, I want to meet with you because we've got to plan a strategy because our kids are going to be corrupted." So he gave me an appointment, and I came into him and I said, "Listen, let's put aside our differences and let's work on this thing together." He said, "What do you want me to do?" So he was helpful. He attended a press conference, etc. And this was like groundbreaking to such an extent that the New York Times put on the front page an article with a picture where I helped set up the two Israeli chief rabbis, representatives of some of the Christian patriarchs from the old city of Jerusalem, and some Muslim leaders, more moderate ones, but religious, to oppose the homosexual parade in Jerusalem. And this made international headlines. It was on the front page of the New York Times. So this is the kind of stuff that can be done. This was a flash of lightning in the darkness. Now, what I said to the Muslims is, listen, we disagree on real estate. Who owns this part of the Middle East? Who owns that part, etc. Said, let's put that aside. Let's first clean up the moral morass and the swamp that's engulfing us. And after that, we can discuss, our differences in terms of real estate. Now, this appeal is not going to work with a lot of hardcore haters, but it will work with a certain amount of people who are cognizant of what's being done to our society. Now, there is no effective movement in the United States or almost anywhere else that's really doing this in a significant way. And the truth must be told that the religio-Christian conservative leadership, whether it's family research, whether it's you name it, I can tell you there's a guy named Stephen Deace, D-E-A-C-E, who I believe he or one of his friends wrote a book in depth and detailed the betrayal that happens time and time again by these good conservative people, but they're feckless, they lack spiritual testicular fortitude, and ultimately, when a McCain invites them, the conservative leadership of this country invites them in his presidential race to a meeting, and I believe it was him, he puts gold nameplates with their names on these chairs at the meeting. None of them had the guts to demand of him specifically, like something that was called the Manhattan Declaration, where they got downright specific about what has to be done to stop the homosexualization of society and all that it entails. They didn't do it with him. They didn't do it with Romney. The day that Romney officially began homosexual marriage, it was the first place it happened in the United States legally, was in Romney State, and he was the governor, and he supported it. I took the last $300, I'm an impoverished person, out of my bank account, right before the Sabbath. I took an Amtrak, arriving 45 minutes before the Sabbath. I arrived in Boston, took a taxi for $7 to Faneuil Hall, which is from Revolutionary War times. And there were a whole bunch of people making a last-ditch effort, obviously after the fact, because Monday morning they were going to start to perform same-gender marriages in Boston, Mass. But I went there and I spoke at a meeting, at a last-minute rally, and it was on television that Friday night. Of course, I'm a Sabbath-observing Jew. I couldn't see it, but I was told about it. On Sunday, I was actually called by CBS News, and they did a small interview with me where I appeared. I'm sorry, I was not called, correction. This Sunday, they took a piece of what had appeared in Saturday in the local Boston thing. They put it on national TV in the upper right-hand corner when they said tomorrow, Monday, there's going to be the first homosexual marriages performed legally in the United States, in the state of Massachusetts and Boston. And I became the face of the opposition by the glory of God. On Monday morning, I was down there, and Fox News had me debating the head of the whole homosexual marriage project. And besides that, CBS News that night actually had me saying a sentence from one of the press conferences I attended that day. So I want to point out to the people, why am I saying this? Am I saying this to blow my own horn? I'm saying this as following. When a person is serious in feeling strongly enough that he will take from his last monies, he will get on a train, take an Amtrak train, spend the Sabbath and Sunday there, and be there for 3 or 4 days and try his hardest to stand up for the glory of God. God will bless him with a success that if I had to hire a PR firm to get me that coverage, it would have probably cost me 25 grand. But God gave it to me because I was real. Now, if one person can do all this, imagine what 1,000 people can do. Imagine what 1,000,000 of us can do.
Well, Rabbi, that's one of the constant themes of our show, and why we started doing this about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, is for the reason you just said. If people see, first of all, we have to do it. We're obligated as Catholic men to fight this culture war, to fight for the truth, to fight in defense of the natural law, for family, for faith in God. We're obligated to do it. But yes, maybe to show other people along the lines of what you said. Okay, you never know what God's going to do with your actions. Okay, but by all means, you got to get out there and do it. I know Joe had another question he wanted to get into.
Sure.
I wanted to ask you about sin, because clearly we don't find sin anywhere. The word isn't even mentioned. Like the danger in that is just so evident. There is no longer right and wrong. And I believe the greatest sin that is plaguing our society currently is abortion. We are one of 7 nations that permit 3rd trimester abortion. That is an atrocity. We should be utterly and absolutely embarrassed. Yet it is championed. I'd love to hear your comments on it, because I know you're a warrior on the front of the pro-life movement in America currently.
Well, let me share something with you, which I mentioned that day that we met in Delaware before we went to Biden's house. We had several priests and myself addressed a group of around 50 people. And I shared with them a teaching that I had imparted or shared with Cardinal Burke. Now, let me explain who Cardinal Burke is, because some people might not know. He was a bishop in La Crosse, Wisconsin, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago or less, maybe approximately. He refused to give Catholic ritual to Biden and Pelosi type Catholics, you know, who are turning Catholicism on its face. particularly in the area of abortion, but maybe in some other areas they were as well turning it on their face in terms of the homosexual agenda and other things. Now, because of this, he was noticed, and Pope, the predecessor, Benedict, the predecessor to Francis, kicked him upstairs. First, he made him an archbishop in St. Louis. And 2 days after he arrived in St. Louis, I happened to be there to speak to a Jewish school about a charity. And I was only there for half a day, and I had the temerity to pick up the phone and to call up the chancery and find out that there was a pro-life grandmother who was in charge of pro-life activities. I said, look, I had the occasion once or twice briefly on the stage on the ellipse to meet then Bishop Burke, and I'm in St. Louis for a matter of hours. I know this is great temerity, it's chutzpah, but could you possibly find out if I could stop by for 5 minutes to congratulate him on his new post? And she got back to me and she said, yes, I'll see you. Now, he had just come there. He had a lot of things to go. He was brand new to the church. He was there for 2 days. I came like on the third day. And he spent together with me 45 minutes in which I did a lot of the talking. And he had an assistant who is around 6'5", who was an auxiliary bishop at the time. I can't remember his name, but I think he's out in Kansas City, if I remember. And we had a frank discussion, and I became a bit friendly with him. And he's a humble man. So a year or two later, he was leading the pro-life march, and it was very wintry, and Amtrak would not come into the station, the Union Station in DC. So I missed my speaking slot, and I took a taxi straight to the Supreme Court as close as I can get, around 15 minutes before the first people in the 100,000 march came past the Supreme Court, which where the march would end, so that all the people could see that the Jews were there, and they would take selfies with us, and we'd have signs, and it was a very fraternal type of thing. So Bishop Burke at the time, he was, or maybe he was the Archbishop. So he steps out of line, walks towards me, and he signals me and waves. He says, in case I forgot who he was, he says, Burke from St. Louis. Then, and very humble. The next time I met him was I traveled to the Vatican, and he had been kicked upstairs, and he was the head of the Pontifical Supreme Court, the highest theological court of the Vatican. He was the head. He was still Archbishop. And I met with him. He was very gracious. And I told him, I'd like to share with you a teaching. There is something that is actually worse than aborting a baby, a preborn baby. What is that? It's bringing a person into licentiousness. I said, why? He said, the rabbis explained, because you can only kill a person once, and you can only kill a person in this world. You don't kill him or her, the innocent baby, in the next world. But when you bring a person in this world into licentious misbehavior of the heterosexual, homosexual, pansexual, transsexual, doesn't matter kind, they're going to repeat their offenses again and again and again. They're going to contaminate other people. Their children will probably have their contamination. And therefore, you're killing the person by bringing them into licentious promiscuity in this world and in the next world. So I said to him, Your Eminence, while I appreciate that the good Christian wants to be spiritually connected with God, so what resonates with him is Genesis 9:6. When Noah disembarked from the ark, he was given several commandments about how the world was going to work. This predated the giving of the Decalogue of the Ten Commandments by 1,000 or more years. This was for the Gentile, for all of the world. And I was told, he who sheds the blood of a man, by a man his blood shall be shed, which means that murder is a capital offense. It's spelled out right there. Now, the construct was very convoluted. He who sheds the blood of man, by a man his blood shall be shed. Why does it have to say by a man again? He shall be punished with death. Why man? By a man his blood shall be. So in Hebrew, the preface Adam is man, as we know. And in Hebrew, it's Adam, Adam. And the preface is Be-Adam, like a bee. That means by a man, his blood shall be shed. It also means within. Be also means within. So you could read the phrase, he who sheds the blood of man within a man, his blood shall be shed. Now, who is man within a man? The answer is it's a fetus. So the self-same phrase in scripture that outlaws in the new creation of the new genesis of the world post-deluge, that outlaws homicide, considers and indicates to you and alludes that feticide is a capital offense. And that's why the Christian or the Gentile who wants to respect God, his inner soul resonates that the raison d'etre, the top of the top, is he fights for the life of the preborn baby. And I explained this to the Archbishop, and I said, but you have to understand that right up there is licentious misbehavior. And for some reason, although in writ and in scripture and philosophically, there will be many religious leaders who will speak out against the sodomization, the homosexualization of society and all its smorgasbord. There is not enough. They don't draw a line in the sand. They'll draw a line in the sand about abortion. Well, we won't countenance it. The true believers, the 10, 12% of society, but not the immorality of this. We'll make excuses when Melania Trump makes her video in the last few days about how her husband is the most pro-homosexual president. We'll suffer that. We'll turn the other cheek to that. And therefore, by turning the other cheek to politicians for years about that, but playing footsie with the Romneys and the McCains when they desperately needed evangelical, Catholic, and Orthodox Jewish support to have a chance of winning, by not drawing a line in the sand with Trump in this election and saying, no, we've got to have a signed document about what you're going to do. And you cannot go to the United Nations and make speeches about religious liberty out of one part of your mouth, and the second part of your mouth, you're literally bullying the 69 or so countries that still have sodomy laws on the books and telling them they've got to get with the times. We won't allow that, Mr. President.
Let me cut in for 1 sec, Rabbi, because because this is an important topic. We have an election on Tuesday, and full disclosure, Joe and I are both voting for Donald Trump. Having said that, we are in agreement with you that it has been disappointing when Rick Grinnell goes overseas and tries to, he was an ambassador to Germany and he wants countries to overturn. He's trying to tell other countries to overturn their sodomy laws. Okay, it's very
Pompeo.
What's that?
Pompeo, the evangelical Pompeo, is doing this proactively on a much greater level.
But Rabbi, here's the thing, and this is and in no way apologizing for Donald Trump and his. We take it more as indifference. Some people might not see it that way. I think Donald Trump is indifferent on that issue, but there is the one thing that I will say, protect us to a certain degree in the fight against the rainbow agenda, and that's judges. And the one area, because we had this conversation, because it's a point that, Joe and I talk about, because it's something that we have to think about, okay? Abortion is the primary issue, okay? But then underneath that, you have all sexual immorality, primary to which is homosexuality and the acceptance of gay marriage and everything else. But the judges that Trump puts in place are going to at the very least protect my right to be able to fight them in the culture war that they've waged on let's call it traditional morality, sexual morality. So in that way, I'm just trying to say, in that way, I'm comfortable as a Roman Catholic man. I'm not going to speak for Joe, but I think I can. I'm comfortable as a Roman Catholic man for that reason, that he's going to appoint the judges that are not going to fight against me in the culture war when it comes to this issue. And I think I'm on pretty firm ground with that.
Let me respond to you in a very straightforward manner, as is my practice. I wish to God that you are right, but you're factually totally and I'm gonna elaborate, totally incorrect.
Okay.
Now let me give you the examples of this. Who did he appoint? Kavanaugh and Gorsuch. Now, in the middle of the summer, I can't tell you the exact date, it was a landmark decision having to do with transsexuals and finding that the civil rights bill that I remember watching on TV as a 10-year-old, Lyndon Baines Johnson signed the civil rights bill of 64.
I think he's talking about Bostock, the Bostock ruling.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's
I think
it.
it's
Right.
Bostock.
Yeah, Clayton versus Bostock.
So basically, let me explain what this is going to do. By ensconcing as a constitutional right and marrying transsexuals into a protected status, along with one's religion and one's pigmentation, what the court has done now is to give a patina of legitimacy to the whole transsexual movement, which was the baby kept even by the homosexuals a scant 5 to 10 years ago. They were afraid to bring this baby out into public, this monstrosity into public. Now, you know how it works. Well, let me elaborate to you. In 1964, I was a 10-year-old. I saw Lyndon Baines Johnson sign that legislation that had been initiated by Kennedy, who was then assassinated. On my 9th birthday, November 22nd, on my 10th birthday, November 22nd, 1963, my 9th birthday. Now, let me tell you that as a young fellow, 10 years old, in 64, in Brooklyn, New York, liberal New York, if I would have seen a black woman holding hands, walking in the street with a white man, it would have been an anomaly. It would have been strange in 1964, I'm telling you this. Now, right after Johnson made his 64 Civil Rights Act, you started to see Bill Cosby on I Spy. You started to see the black woman in Star Trek. All of a sudden, there was a proliferation of showing fraternization between the genders and in advertisements. And what this did, in a positive sense, was it augmented, because as legislation goes in this country, that becomes the social mores and the social values. Now, you have to understand that when you find for homosexual marriage, there has been a tremendous increase now in advertising and programming and everything else at every stage to push the normalcy of homosexual marriage. And now the Supreme Court ruled this about transsexuals. You know what's going to happen, my friend? More and more young people that are already, there are statistics, and I've studied this, are getting sex change hormones and attempting to get operations at earlier and earlier stages, and with one parent supporting it, and all kinds of garbage. And this is thanks to a judge named Gorsuch, the conservative, who wrote the opinion.
I'm not going to lie to you, Rabbi.
Only,
Both Joe and I we covered it on the show. We were very disappointed.
wait a second, but
Not necessarily for his position. And then this is just from a judicial point of view. He basically said, he did in that decision what he said in his testimony in front of the Senate that he wasn't going to do, which was legislate from the bench. In other words, the reason why they haven't been able to change the Civil Rights Act is because they have to change it through the legislative process. And the American people were not willing to recognize that distinction that you're talking about. They were not willing to change male and female to reflect something other than male and female. So Gorsuch took it upon himself to do that. We're not, Rabbi, I do want to make this point. We're not saying that, let's say, out of the 300 or so judges that Trump has appointed, that everyone's a winner. But the way I like to say it on the show is, I'll take 90% good judges over 100% bad ones that we are absolutely going to get if Biden and Harris get in. And I think you'd agree with that, because that will be a disaster.
Again, I want to tell you two things. I want to explain to you the betrayal. I don't know what you covered in your program, but let me go a step further with you. If you do the research, you will find that in approximately 2016 or so, maybe a little before that, when Gorsuch was on the Court of Appeals, he had a similar case, and he already ruled the same way he's ruling on the Supreme Court. Now, bear with me. When the Trump people or any president picks a candidate, they do tremendous research on every single opinion and every utterance and every article. Trump's people knew that Gorsuch is going to do this. This was not an oversight. This was by design, because Trump's philosophy is, I can get away with the sodomy agenda, I'll do it, and I will come on the TV on a national program the Sunday after I'm president-elect and say, don't worry, homosexual society, it's a matter of settled law marriage. I will not disturb that. Why isn't abortion settled law? That's only 48 years old. You know why? Because Trump knows he won't get the Catholics like you or the evangelicals who are willing to turn the other cheek and rationalize what he's doing in homosexuals as long as you throw us the bone of abortion. And therefore, that's been happening. And Trump is very keen, and he has the audacity now that he knows that in this election, that he desperately needed the Catholics, evangelicals, Orthodox Jews. Nobody came to him and sat down with him and said, this ain't gonna work. 6 months ago, there should have been agreements on it. So he appointed a Gorsuch knowing what he's gonna do, and Kavanaugh wrote in his decision, he dissented because he said, look, this should be done legislatively. But then if you read the rest of what Kavanaugh wrote, congratulations for working so hard to come to state. These are the judges that he support, that he put on. This is the favor he did for us. Outrageous, disgusting. That this has to make the blood of anybody boil. These people will kill us. Now, let's move to Amy Coney Barrett. Let's move to her. The stupidest person in the Senate, for anybody who watched the hearings of her hearings, was this Harinio, or whatever her name is, from Hawaii.
Hawaii.
Every word like a person in the 4th grade reading from a primer. And she had the chutzpah to use the word, Ms. Barrett did, preference, a word that was used by the heterosexuals for most of the last 20 years, sexual preference. In other words, if I choose to be like this, my business, I can choose chocolate, vanilla, strawberry, whatever else. But now they want to play it like, no, this was God's doing. So the politically correct term is now orientation. Mm-hmm. So when she by mistake, meaning no disrespect, used preference, so the imbecile senator from Hawaii reads this whole thing, how dare you? So what does the judge do? She gets down and she apologizes. Oh, I'm so sorry. I used the word preference instead of using the word orientation. I didn't mean to hit anybody. Now that before she even got on the bench, she's already starting. Now, if we were smart, we would have a letter writing campaign. No, Ms. Barrett, we appreciate you have 7 kids, and we appreciate that you adopted Haitian kids, and we appreciate you have a special needs kids, and we appreciate the extreme right-wing Catholic organization that you're religiously established. But if you're going to start kowtowing with terminologies to them before you even sit on the bench, that's how we checkmate that and stop that. Who's doing that? Who's saying, no, dear, that's not the way we start out, on the left foot. So as far as judges are concerned, I don't know what he's doing socially with the 300 judges he opposed. I didn't check carefully, and I don't have the ability to. But on the top court, it's damn scary with this whole conservative thing they're talking about.
Roberts is just I'm sure we're going to. I mean, again, Clayton versus Bostock, that was certainly a disappointment. And you're right, Brett Kavanaugh's language in his dissent, it's like, why are you apologizing for doing your job? Just write your dissent, or don't write anything. Don't get into your dissent. Just basically.
Oh, you know why? This is kissing posterior in the most egregious fashion.
Wow.
This is genuflecting to deviancy for no reason. This is a declaration, nothing to do with morality. It's anti-morality. It's just a question like the one who said, madam, what you are has been established. You're a whore. We're just dickering about the price that it takes. This is what we have in the Supreme Court today. So the fools who said, because of the great job Trump is doing for the Supreme Court. He's like 3 cuts better than, than total sodomy in the middle of the streets. And we have to accept this and cheer him. And his wife can throw it in our faces 3 days before an election how pro-gay he is. You know what? A religious person who votes for Trump anywhere in the country, he has to vote for Trump in red states or in swing states. But you know what he or she has to do? I'll speak Catholic language. He has to say 7,500 Hail Marys and a few novenas, and he has to cry that this is the choice that God's giving him. Not wave, he's great, he's fantastic. He's not great and fantastic, because everybody has to understand the sodomy agenda, how it affects us. I don't know if you've ever explained this to your people. The sodomy agenda does not just affect the sodomy subculture. It's by design. They have a guilt complex that we, the religious, the remnant, look at them as something wrong. And that gives them a guilt trip. They don't want it. So you know what they do? They work to lower the age of sexual consent for heterosexuals. They work to take adultery, which is not even enforced, off the books. That's why Deborah Glick, the assemblyman lesbian from Greenwich Village, for years was introducing bills to take adultery off the books, saying, since it's not enforced, then we're not so archaic anymore to punish a person for adultery, so why we should have something like that on the books? For the same reason that the homosexuals want to remove the word sodomy from laws, in the act of anal penetration rape. They don't want people to be reminded that Sodom's story in Sodom, everybody knew. It's because the people of Sodom said, let us know these people carnally. They wanted to homosexualize Lot's visitors.
Rabbi, Rabbi, yeah. I'm sorry, only because we're coming up on the hour, and Joe and I are going to have to go do our show. But let me ask you a question, and I know I want to kick it over to Joe for one last question. But let me ask you this briefly, Rabbi. Would you accept an argument? Now, I'm not making one to you. I'm just saying, if a person was to say, Trump is not the transformative candidate that we're looking for, that let's say people like us are looking for, but he is the necessary vote because he is the transitional candidate or the transitional president that could get us to that point. Maybe we'll all be dead by that time, but perhaps he could get us to that point where we would have that person that you're talking about. So the difference being between the transitional president and the transformative president, again, it's an open question. I think that Trump's been pretty much more transitional. In other words, because he hasn't been able to do so much. He's been more transitional, but perhaps it gives us enough of a reprieve inside of, let's say, 4 years. And with most judges taking our back, where we'll be able to fight the fight to get to that transformative candidate in the future. But answer briefly, please, Rabbi, because we're coming up on the hour.
Well, let me tell you how you do it. Let me tell you exactly how you do it. In a blue state like California, where there's no chance of Trump winning, I see no reason in the world that we should turn the other cheek to the evil, by design, of President Trump, Richard Grenell, Melania Trump, who's a Catholic who knows damn well better. There's no reason, because this emboldens him for the next 4 years to do what he wants. So religiously, how do you go into a voting booth and vote for somebody who's basically sodomizing society to a certain extent? Richard Nixon went to China. Only that fierce anti-communist was able to open up China. We would have never accepted it from a liberal Democrat. What Trump is doing with his ersatz conservatism is he's going to places which we hitherto wouldn't have expected it. So if you're a religious person in a red state or a swing state, you go in crying to God that we didn't merit to have somebody decent, and this is we have to compromise. But you cry and you say, God, the only way I will allow myself to do this is I have been delinquent for the last 6 months in not bombarding the White House and making deals to reverse things in codified ways. And we didn't do this. We blithely went around our business and we're waving Trump flags and getting excited. As far as in a state, as far as myself, come hell or high water, I say if I have people like this running, I turn to God. I'm not telling the world to do this, but I say, I'm not lifting my hand to give any support to somebody who's going to do something that they're going to be teaching the public schools with more ferocity, because the president, the conservative of the United States, has given the kosher sign of approval to trannyism. Terrible.
Well, Rabbi,
That's where we're at.
Right.
We have to
that part
put
of
it
the
right
conversation,
straight.
that part of the conversation, we're going to have to leave that there. Joe, what did you have?
I have just one question, but I just want to say you are so right that any marriage outside of a man and a woman and any type of behavior that leads to that type of relationship is an intrinsic evil and will ultimately destroy our society. That is a fact, and I respect your statements greatly. I also will state that abortion, the destruction of a life, is also an intrinsic evil, and we
Absolutely.
both must fight together. Ultimately and absolutely on the same page. I respect your opinion greatly, actually. Donald Trump is not the Messiah.
Right.
And any person that looks at it that way is wrong. And the natural law that is on your heart and our heart tells us that same-sex marriage is a sin, and so is abortion. And we must keep our vision clear. And I respect you in what you said, because you are correct. Both are intrinsic evils. I have one more question, Rabbi.
Sure.
What's the answer? How do we get through this darkness? What is the answer? For both the Jewish people and the Christian people and people of goodwill in our society, how do we come out of this culture of death?
So the first thing is like this. You have a conservative, Jewish, brilliant guy like Dennis Prager. But Dennis Prager, on his Prager University, he'll feature, quote unquote, conservative leaning or conservative homosexuals. And the conservative homosexual, I forget his name, who heads a town hall or something, I think. See, he says, look, and he tells his homosexual people on the left, I can accomplish more towards making our stuff palatable to the right by doing what I'm doing with Prager. So Prager is an enabler. He lets the people get the nose of the camel under the tent. You understand? And this is happening at so many of the log cabin Republicans. This is happening in so many areas. So the first thing is we have to start building what we call a remnant. And the remnant has to be uncompromising. We have to continue to talk. And the same way I'm a witness that in the last 20 years, young people had been leaving off the whole abortion fight. And now when you go to the March for Life and you see there's a whole new generation of young people who are enthused. And slowly the country is turning more pro-life with the younger people, not less pro-life, which is a proof that it can be done. It can be done in terms of morality. We have to strengthen clubs and colleges that still preach morality, that are under attack. We have to teach the youth strategies of how to live in Sodom-on-the-Hudson, which is my name for New York, and get media coverage and do things positively, that they should feel accomplishments, okay? I mean, this is the source of another program to discuss strategies of how we can do this. But if we're uncompromising, we start with 2 people, 4 people, 8 people, and we build from the ground up. And we give people a verve, an enjoyment of religious life and spiritual life. And we give them feelings of superiority because they are superior when they don't couple in the street and act like animals. And when it's explained the value of virginity and how they'll be happier in life. And all these things, it's a whole package. And it has to be done. Who's doing this in the churches? People are doing some things not. You understand, when you see in Liberty University, you see the corruption of Jerry Falwell Jr., who I gave an endorsement on his father's book back in '87, pro-life book. Again, you see Jerry Jr., what he did. So you understand, this is already a bastion of a Christian college. And look what's going on here. Changes have to be made. People have to stand up and talk and step by step strategize. We have to learn from our enemies. The homosexuals strategize. You could go back to their writings in the 50s and the 60s. They told us what they're going to do, and then they did it. We have to have similar plans, Manhattan plans to save our people, and we can. And I'll be happy to come on again to discuss with you in more depth.
I was going to ask you, Rabbi. We could tell in this our first conversation with you here at the front line with Joe and Joe that we were going to ask you to come back, because these are meaty conversations. These are conversations that need to be had. I think there's going to be a lot to talk about. You've laid the groundwork for it. There's going to be a lot to talk about after the election, whatever happens.
Right.
There's going to be a lot to talk about in all the events going on, different court cases that are coming up on the lower courts and the Supreme Court. So yes, please, we'd love to have you back. Something tells me a couple of Catholics and an Orthodox Jew like you, I think we could go on for hours and hours and hours. So we definitely want to mix it up with you again, if that's okay with you.
It would be my pleasure. Thank you so much for the time. God bless.
All right, so that was Rabbi Yehuda Levin. We want to thank you for joining us at the front line with Joe and Joe, Joe Pasillo and Joe Resinello. Please follow us on Facebook and YouTube at the front line with Joe and Joe. Like, subscribe, share, do all that fun stuff. And remember, and please share this video. Share this video. We're here talking about the problems plaguing our society, the problems in the culture war. So share it with your friends. And remember, till next time, that our conversation is your conversation, and that conversation is going on everywhere. So we'll talk to you soon.